Are you looking for character-driven sci-fi or fantasy books? Then you are in the right place. Hello BookTube, I'm Jonathan, and today I'm joined by one of my favorite booktubers, Johanna. Johanna, are you a character-focused reader?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be on your channel. I'm a
You're
huge
welcome.
admirer. And as far as this question is concerned, it's a really interesting one because I think at one point I would have definitely said, yes, I'm a character focused reader. But I think what I've been striving to do in my reading lately is I've been striving to, rather than think of myself as a character focused reader and then judging a book solely on the characters and whether I like them or not, is
Yeah,
I've tried to sort of focus on what is the narrative trying to do? What is the author trying to do with the story? Is the author trying to focus on characters? Or is the author trying to
interesting.
highlight certain themes, ideas, maybe a sense of atmosphere, and then try to assess based on that? But often I find the characters do play a central role, either in highlighting certain themes or in helping us get to know the setting or world if we're exploring world building. So I think
Totally.
characters are important.
Definitely. Well, as someone that mostly reads sci-fi, characters are not always the focus. It can be on the concepts and other crazy sci-fi ideas. But today, we're focusing on the characters. We're going to recommend 5 sci-fi books, 5 fantasy books that are character-driven stories. And I'm going to kick us off with one that I think is fairly well known, and that is Red Rising. So, the premise for this one, I've read the original trilogy. The premise for the first book, Red Rising, is that in the future, society is set into rigid social hierarchies set by colors. And our main character, Darrow, he is a lowly red, and he tries to infiltrate an elite institute of the Golds. So, this is written in first person, and I think character is really important when you're reading first person. You need to connect or at least be somewhat interested in this character. And some people might say Darrow is a little one tone. I think you could probably sum up Darrow with the word rage. But it is interesting to see how he develops throughout the course of the series. That rage can come out in different ways, whether it's genius, violence, stupidity. And I really enjoyed getting to know Darrow, his journey, and as well as some of the other characters, whether they were friends, enemies, or something in between. There was always something interesting going on with our other members of the cast, like Severo, Mustang, the Jackal, and characters like that. So it's a fast-paced book, very interesting premise, but I think it works and is so popular because of the characters.
Fantastic. And actually, it's interesting because I'm going to go ahead and switch up my list a little bit. I'm not doing this in
Ooh.
any sort of order as far as like enjoyment or character preference or anything. But because you talked about Red Rising, I feel like I have to talk about the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb because
Ooh,
I
nice.
described this trilogy as being almost the opposite of Red Rising in sense of, in the sense of pace and setting. At the same time, it's also in first person narration. And so I think it's a really interesting comparison to Red Rising from that point of view, because we follow a character named Fitz who is an orphan, and he ends up in a situation which is very uncomfortable in court. And he has to become an assassin along the way, and you meet some other fantastic characters through his perspective. Now, some people don't really like Fitz very much because he's not exactly our typical chosen one, and he's not exactly the smartest character all the time. But you really get to know a lot of. But one thing that Robin Hobb does so well is she makes the first person narration so seamless that, for me, I almost forgot I was in Fitz's perspective because I felt like I was getting to know so many of the other characters so thoroughly. And I thought it was just brilliant the way she did it. But it is
It's
the
sometimes
opposite.
interesting when you forget you're reading a book in first person. Someone mentions it and you're like, oh yeah, it is. But there was just so much going on that I was taking it all in.
Yes, yes, I think it's brilliant from that perspective. But I did love the character work in that trilogy, even with Fitz as flawed as he was. And that's kind of the challenge with first person narration, right? Is if you don't like the character you're following in first person,
Yeah.
then it can be kind of hard to continue the journey. If you don't like Darrow in Red Rising, it can be kind of difficult to continue along. But I think that both of these are great explorations on first person narration. And I think that both authors do a great job of highlighting some other really great contrasting characters through first person narration.
I know people, so some of my book friends are massive Robin Hobb fans, and she said, Jonathan, check out this 15 book series. That's a tough pitch. So I like that it's broken up into mini series. If you thought that sounded good, but you're not so sure about diving in, you can start with the different trilogies. The Farseer trilogy is the first of, is there five in the Realm of the Elderlings total?
Yes, I've only read Farseer at this point. I have heard that the second trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings, the Live Ship Traders, does have multi POV, and that people really enjoy her multiple perspectives as well. So I was very impressed. I was very impressed with what I got in Farseer. So I look forward to reading more Robin Hobb. I do think that she is fantastic with character work.
So there you go. Great character work from Robin Hobb in first person and multi POV. So that's something to look forward to. My next sci-fi recommendation, we're going classic with this one, and that is Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes. So the premise for Flowers for Algernon is that a man, Charlie, with a very low IQ, undergoes an experimental surgery to increase his intelligence after this surgery was successfully completed on a mouse. But when the mouse starts to regress, the question becomes, will the same thing happen to Charlie? So the really interesting thing about this book is that it is written entirely in journal entries. So we get to see Charlie's character develop through how he writes, how his grammar and spelling improves, how he sees the world as his intelligence changes. But not just how he communicates himself, we also get to see what personality traits either change or stay the same based on the way his life changes and how people around him treat him differently because of this increased intelligence. So I think this is one of the most powerful books I've ever read. This is a wonderful character journey, really hit me hard, and it's kind of light sci-fi, some speculative fiction. So if you're not a typical sci-fi reader, you're not so much into the aliens and space travel and that kind of stuff. I think Flowers for Algernon is a pretty good place for you to start if you like character-driven books.
That's a great suggestion. I did read that one in high school. I remember that getting to me quite a bit. I'm definitely overdue for a reread of
For the
that
record,
one.
I didn't cry. Definitely didn't cry for a solid 20 to 30 minutes after I finished
You lasted that long, at least. My goodness. Yes. Great choice. Yes. So for my second choice, I have to go with the First Law trilogy. Of
it.
course, with Joe Abercrombie, there's the whole First Law world. So you have the original trilogy, you have the three standalones, you have the short story collection, and then his Age of Madness trilogy. I still have yet to read the short story collection and Age of Madness trilogy, but I have read his original trilogy and three standalones. And if you like, I would say, morally gray characters, this is definitely a good series. It's called Grimdark, but really a lot of people are surprised it's not as horrific and gory as you might imagine for Grimdark. But the
Gotcha.
characters are they are so funny, and they are so, um, I don't know, they're so distinct. I think this is definitely one of the series where I think people have often said that you can look at any character's dialogue on the page and know which character is talking without dialogue tags. And that's one thing that is just brilliant about Joe Abercrombie's writing of character is the dialogue. Now, the first book, The Blade itself, it's very much a heavy character-focused story. The second book has more of a plot, and that was the book that won me over personally. It wasn't just the characters in themselves, but also the way that they interact with each other and the humorous ways they interact with each other that make it such a fantastic, fantastic trilogy.
That's awesome. I have not read First Law. I'm focusing on sci-fi at the moment, but I do have a list of fantasy to try, and First Law is near the top of it. I'm very intrigued by these characters. People seem to love these characters, even though they're potentially terrible people. So I want to know what makes them so intriguing, so funny, and yeah, what makes them
Yes.
so that interesting, and that people love this series so much.
Yes, he will get you to love characters that maybe you shouldn't really be loving or rooting for, but he does it in such a humorous, wonderful way. So I highly recommend this trilogy.
Awesome. That's one I'll be checking out. I hope you guys do too. All right, let's see. Next up, okay, this one's partially sci-fi here and there. It is Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. So, Cloud Atlas is split into 6 stories in 6 different time periods, and it's famous for its structure because those stories are told in the order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And while the structure is very interesting, the themes are very powerful, I think that unique story that we know is connected in some way, but not exactly how when we first start. I think that story works because of the intriguing characters. So in the different time periods, whether it is the unique kind of master and apprentice relationship between Frobisher and Ayres, the musicians, or it is the very funny Timothy Cavendish, or to me, the very empathetic and I found to be inspirational Sonmi 451, a clone. We have a wide variety of characters that each touched me and each kind of linked to the thematic kind of exploration of interconnectedness. I ended up becoming really intrigued by and invested in these characters in a book that's really kind of only 2/6 sci-fi, but sci-fi enough to put on this list if you like something a bit interesting literary wise and with some intriguing characters.
Yeah, it sounds like it has an interesting structure too, so that sounds clever.
It did get turned into a movie, which got mixed responses, but I liked it. I feel like the movie's a little underrated, so read the book and then check out the movie. I think it's pretty good.
Great. Well, my next choice is going to be actually something that blends a little bit into sci-fi, and that's the Dark Tower series by Stephen King.
Ooh, nice.
And I'm choosing this one because I just recently finished it and the characters really stayed with me. So, something that's really common in fantasy is what we call the found family trope. And that's when we have a band of characters that wouldn't normally come together, but they end up finding each other and end up having a quest together for whatever reason. Stephen King comes up with some very creative reasons for why these characters end up together. And one thing that Stephen King does so well, this also speaks to the sci-fi element in it, and you really see this in the second book specifically, is that these characters come from different times, possibly different worlds, but different times,
Ah,
different timelines. And
nice.
that Stephen King is able to, the way he's able to depict characters from different time eras and make them believable is it's so unique to how he writes. I've never read another author who was able to do it the way Stephen King does. He does this also very well in his book 11/22/63, which is considered a sci-fi book. But his character work in The Dark Tower for me even exceeded the character work in 11/22/63. I thought each of the characters just they felt so distinct, so authentic to their time, to their cultures. One even has dissociative identity disorder, and the way that he was able
Huh.
to portray that was just it seemed researched, honestly. It seemed very authentic in a way. So it was a series that was very touching. Another trope that we see in fantasy, this is also in Farseer as well, is the animal companion.
Oh, I love
The
it.
animal companion, it's
As
hard to
someone that recently got a dog, I'm very
ah,
I'm very
yes.
excited about some animal companions in my books.
Yes, absolutely. So it's hard for me to decide. I think most people would choose the Night Eyes character, the animal companion in Farseer, as being the best. But I also really loved the animal companion Oi, a character, a little Billy Bumbler, which is a fictional animal that Stephen King created called Oi, who has kind of human like gestures and mannerisms. He's able to wink and smile, and he has a lolling tongue, and he just is so endearing. And he feels every bit as important to that found family as the other characters. So I missed these characters as soon as I finished this series. So I have to say the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, and a wonderful genre blending sort of series for people who love sci-fi as well as fantasy and other types of genres blended into their to their fiction.
Awesome. Well, I'm very intrigued by The Dark Tower. It is actually on my schedule for 2023, and I'm glad that you said that it has some sci-fi elements because I am focusing on sci-fi for the channel, but I really want to read The Dark Tower, and I'd heard it had some sci-fi in it, and I was wondering, well, is this going to be sci-fi enough? Well, there you go. Johanna gave us the verdict. It does count as sci-fi.
I think so. One of my favorite subgenres in sci-fi is time travel, and it has
Yes,
a
me too.
little bit of time travel in it. It starts off not
S tier
seeming.
trope. It's
Yes, yes.
I love time travel.
It doesn't seem when you start the Dark Tower, it doesn't seem. It has been a while since I read book one, but it didn't really strike me that it was going to go the direction it did. It did feel more like it was just going to be a Western dystopian type of fantasy. But wow, read book two, read on when you start this series because you'll see other genres blend in right away. And you even see some horror elements as well, as you can imagine with Stephen King. But it
Yeah.
was well worth the journey.
Yeah, I've heard you've got to read the first two, so I'm committing to reading the first two, and I'm pretty. It's got animal companions and time travel. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna like it.
Yes.
Okay, so for my fourth sci-fi book recommendation, another popular one, popular I think for good reason, and that is Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. So the premise for this one is that in the future, humans are at war with an alien species, and they decide to recruit some intelligent, up and coming children to a battle school in order to try and find a commander that can lead them to a strategic victory over these aliens. So, whenever I think about this book, I'm always surprised when I remember it's only about 300 pages because it packs so much in. I think it has great themes, story, a jaw dropping ending. But what has really stayed with me is the characters. So, Ender Wiggin is our main character, a young boy that gets recruited to battle school. And while it is a bit of a chosen one trope, I think he's a very deep character. And the way that Ender thinks about things adds a really nice philosophical layer to everything that's going on in the book. And some of the people that he meets at battle school, whether it is Bean, Shadow, or his brother and sister that are back home, like Peter and Valentine, I thought they all had very unique voices, interesting perspectives, and the way they reacted to things surprised me. And I like that in a book. I feel like I know, oh, this is the type of character this person is, and then they'll do something that I didn't expect, and it'll reveal different layers that I didn't know were there. And so I know that overly intelligent children isn't a trope that is everyone's favorite, but I think they were written excellently. I think these are some of my favorite kids, and I think this is would appeal to both new and experienced sci-fi readers because of these great characters.
I loved Ender's Game, and I actually mentioned this book in a couple of recent videos because I read it
Nice.
about 10 or 11 years ago and I enjoyed it. But then recently I've been watching videos on BookTube, and people have been talking about all these deep themes with that book. And I don't feel like I really read it on that level. I just had a fun time. But I'd really like to reread that book at some point and just see if I can explore some of those deeper philosophical themes. And I like what you said about the character making some unexpected choices because I think that's something that a lot of people think they might want in a character is consistency, where the
Yeah.
character always is consistent with the choices they make. But I actually like it when authors take a risk with characters making some unexpected choices now and then because I think that's true to life. We're all a bit unpredictable at times.
Yeah. They're not sitcom characters. They just keep on making the same mistakes in different scenarios. Although I love sitcoms, it's just a different different type of character. And yeah, I think the what's explored in Ender's Game is I found to be really rewarding.
Wonderful. Yay, I'm glad you chose that one. All right, so I my next one is going to be one of my favorite series of all time, and it is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin.
Awesome.
So this is one that I would actually recommend even for people who are maybe experienced readers but new to fantasy. This is actually a series that I gave to my father. I gave him the first book. He had never read fantasy before in his life. He had mostly read just mystery thrillers and John Grisham books and things like that. And he read the first book and he was hooked and he ended up binging the whole entire series.
That's
But
awesome.
you can't talk about this series without talking about the fascinating characters. And so, one thing that you start to notice, I think, when you start reading a lot is how And this kind of goes back to the character focused stories versus stories that focus on other kinds of elements, is that often these elements all kind of blend together. And I feel like George R. Martin has a very unique way of sort of weaving together plot and characters and setting all together in such a beautiful way. So you get incredible epic world building and magic and dragons, but the characters are fascinating. And not only is there one amazing character, there are tons of amazing
Yeah.
characters. And that was the thing that blew my mind when I read the first book, is I had never read, I don't think I had ever read a multi POV book like that before, that had so many characters, that had a huge list. And I ended up feeling invested in every single one and being able to follow every single one. He seems to follow every single archetype of character that you can imagine. So you have your young, innocent characters, you have your dark, gritty villains, you have people who are more explorers or loyalists, just such a range, and wonderful family dynamics as well, and political elements in there as well. So it's just an incredible blend with the characters. I had such a great time, a lot of moral complexity too.
I think it's impressive when an author can write that many different point of views that are able to capture your attention, or you like them or you invest in them. Because even in books that I like quite a lot, if there's more than like, two or three POVs, there'll be a chapter and you're like, oh, all right, let's skim through this guy's chapter, or like, not this guy again.
Yeah.
But if you can hold a reader's attention in multiple locations, multiple characters, that's such a good example of having a fully fleshed out world and being a really talented character writer, like George R. Martin.
That is so well said, because that's exactly how I felt reading the book. I was invested in every single character, and it was just amazing because you have characters of all different ranges, of all different ages, I'm sorry, of all different backgrounds, different parts of the world, different cultures, and they're all so fascinating. So I really enjoyed that. I know it's considered a very dark series, and I am very fascinated by that element as well, because one thing he does that I think is incredible is he makes a character so detestable, so horrible, that you think, I hate this character. I hate him, but I'm fascinated by him.
Yeah.
And then later on, he'll introduce you to another character who's even worse. And then suddenly the character you hated before almost looks redeemed in comparison to this worst character who comes along. And so it kind of messes with your sense of morality in a way. Now, I know a lot of people who watch this may have watched the show and not read the books. I would urge you to read the books. I think they're better, even though the show had a great cast and everything. We all know how that ended with the seasons. But I would recommend reading it. And I am going to be hosting a read along for this on my channel next year, starting
Oh,
in
awesome.
January. Yes.
Awesome. Well, definitely,
Feel free to join.
if you're interested in some dark characters, some ones that you might want to root against, or maybe start to root for when you get some introduced to some even worse characters, definitely pick that one up and join the read along in January. That sounds fun. Okay, so for my fifth and final sci-fi recommendation, we have another modern one, and this is A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martin. So the premise for A Memory Called Empire, this is the first book in a duology, is that an ambassador from an independent station in a future where there's a galactic empire, she travels from this independent station to Teixcaland, which is kind of the center of the empire. And the reason why she has to go there is because the previous ambassador died under mysterious circumstances. So that's quite the job assignment. And the reason why I really liked Mahit, who's the main character, she is an outsider. She is coming from a place with a different culture, different environment, coming to Teixcaland, and the kind of layers that unravels, how she feels, how she interacts with people, how those are different because of her being an outsider, and how that impacts her emotionally. I thought was really well explored. I became very invested in that character. And then the relationships between the other characters. This is a great political book. So there's a lot of manipulation. There's a lot of, truths, lies, half truths, forming of alliances, everyone trying to use each other for their own gains. So I really appreciated and enjoyed the relationship dynamics as well. I have heard some people say they didn't like these characters, which I find to be a little bit surprising. Maybe that scheming didn't work for them, but I became connected to them, to Mahit in particular. So I definitely recommend checking that one out. If you're looking for something that's kind of modern, but kind of influenced by like Foundation and June, but a little bit more character focused, this would be my recommendation.
Oh, neat. Okay, great. I've heard fantastic things. And is that a duology?
Yes, there's two books in the Teixtquelan duology: A Memory Called Empire and A Desolation Called Peace, and I enjoy both of them.
Great, great. Well, for my last recommendation, I guess I will have to go. This was hard, by the way. I have a few different series here that I could choose from, but I think I have to go with this. I'm gonna have to say Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson, which is
Yes.
behind me on the shelf. It's a 10-book series. There's, of course, a whole Malazan universe, so there are several other books that are considered Malazan, written also by Ian C. Esselmont. But I've only read the 10-book series by Stephen Erickson. And I have a few things to say about this. So I think that some people might be a little perplexed when I choose this series if they haven't read very far into it. Because, I mean, kind of like A Song of Ice and Fire, there are tons and tons of characters. But unlike A Song of Ice and Fire, you don't have like in A Song of Ice and Fire, I should say, you have chapters that are labeled after specific characters. So you know exactly what character you're following and you have exact POVs. In
Yeah.
Malazan, it's a little bit more sprawling in a way. Like you have tons and tons and tons of characters, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And in a way, a lot of people would say it's not quite a character driven series in the typical way a fantasy series is a character driven series. So in most fantasy, you follow a found family or just a select few characters. Even
Yeah.
in Martin's books, I feel like you're still kind of focused and juggling between a few characters before you introduce a few more. But in Malazan, you're introducing a ton of characters, and then going to book two, introducing maybe a few overlaps, and then a ton of other new characters, and then a new continent, and then the third book, even more new characters, and you're constantly being introduced to characters all the way through book 10. And so a lot of people would say it's more of a theme-based series, but the themes are explored, I would say, largely through the characters and what the characters are struggling with. And I think
Interesting.
that, it's interesting because, like I said, I don't know that I would have necessarily said this in the first half of the series as I was reading it. I really enjoyed the characters in the first 5 books, or at least in the first 4 books, I should say. But around book 4 on, I started to realize I was in love with the characters to the point where I would say some of my favorite characters of all time are in this series. And you do get quite a range. It's interesting. It's like Martin in that sense, where you get a wide range of archetypes, but they feel so, and it's been a while since I've read A Song of Ice and Fire, but with Malazan, they feel very vivid. They felt very vivid to me. Their struggles felt very realistic to me. I felt as though I could see myself in these characters in a very vivid way. And he also plays with moral complexity, I would say, in a different way than Martin. So, whereas I was saying with Martin, you get characters who are evil in a way or do horrible things. And then you bring up characters who are even more horrible, do horrible things to those characters. In Malazan, it's more like you have what you think are the good guys, and then you read on and think about it and realize, well, are they doing something that's good in the end? They're kind of running this empire and there's sort of this imperialist theme going on. And then you can run across some people who you think are just the worst people possible. And then you
Yep.
find out, well, they kind of had reasons for why they did what they did. So he kind of keeps, getting you to rethink your position all the time and never giving you a certain place to land. And I loved that. I loved the questions he brought up without giving you hard answers on how you should feel about these characters or what you should think. but they are characters that just really stayed with me and that I saw myself in and that I just absolutely adored. So I just have to go with that series, even though a lot of people, like I said, would probably say it's not necessarily a character driven series in the typical way fantasy is character driven.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I like the complexity that you described, and I think within character-driven books, there's different approaches. You could have a character-driven book where there's only one point of view. To think of an example, maybe like The Martian, we kind of just follow that character. We're just getting his thoughts, but that's pretty much just him 90% of the book. But then you could have something like Malazan, where if we have hundreds of characters, we might not spend as much time with each individual character, but we're exploring different things that are connecting to the plot, to the themes, through the complexities of those many little individual characters. I don't know, I said little, as if they were like little tiny models or something on a
Yeah,
board, but yeah.
it's really interesting the way he does it because even though that's the case, at the same time, you feel very close and intimate with the characters, even if you're with them just for a few paragraphs. And when you experience the traumas that they go through, it's like he writes them in such a believable way where you really understand trauma in a really complex way too. So I really appreciated it for just all of those details. It was one of the most vivid series I've ever read, and the characters for me were just absolutely incredible.
I love it. That's some high praise. Sounds deserved. That's another one that I'm intrigued by. A bit of a commitment, but I'll get to it eventually. I'll let you know when it's coming up on the schedule. So there we go. I appreciate you managing to pick just five. It was a tough task. I mean, I wanted to include Hyperion, Sun Eater. I talk about those a lot, so check out some of my other videos. I think you can see them. Where are they? There you go. There's the Sun Eater collection. Anyway, check out those videos if you're interested in those. But yeah, this was a lot of fun to talk about. Thanks a lot for coming on. And everyone, go subscribe if you like. You read a range of genres, but is fantasy your favorite genre? Am I correct in saying that?
Fantasy is my favorite genre, yes, but I do love other genres as well, as you said. And it was also hard for me to narrow this list because there are so many great characters in fantasy, so many, and I could have pointed to any book on my shelf pretty much as to other characters I absolutely adore.
Awesome. Well, we hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Thanks for checking it out. Go check out Joanna's channel as well, and somewhere on the screen you can find more sci-fi content over here.